This episode is sponsored by packs, the gold standard in emergency response bags. So when you're working under pressure, you need kit to be both dependable, tough and intuitive, and that's exactly what you get with packs. Every bag is handcrafted by expert tailors who understand the demands of personal care, from the high-tech, skin-friendly and environmentally responsible materials to the cutting-edge welding process that reduces seams and makes cleaning easier. Packs absolutely puts performance first. They've partnered with 3M to make perfect reflective surfaces for better visibility, and bright grey interior makes finding kit effortless and fast even in low light. With over 200 designs, Packs bags are made to suit your role, your needs and your environment. And thanks to their modular system, many bags work seamlessly together no matter the setup. Packs doesn't chase trends, their designs stay consistent, so once you know one, you know them all. And if your bag ever takes a beating, their in-house repair team will bring it back to life. Packs are built to perform, made to last. Learn more at packs/bags.com or head to the show notes for further details.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, it's going to be the third and final part of our mini-series on exploring the dynamics of decision-making in high-stakes environments. So while the first two episodes really focused on intuitive, rapid decision-making under pressure, today we're going to take a step back into the world of deliberate, reflective decision-making in slow time. So today I'm joined by Detective Superintendent Ahenkora Bediako, a senior police officer within London's Metropolitan Police Service. He has 18 years of experience rising through the ranks of the police. So in the conversation, what we're going to do really is explore how time, patience, ethics, and emotional intelligence play into long-term investigative decision-making. From managing risk and uncertainty to building trust in communities, this episode is going to go beyond the immediate to the unpacking of deeper layers of mindful decision-making. So what we really want to do is really examine the power of the discipline of slowing decision-making down. Welcome, Ahenkora, to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us, actually. I just wonder if we could start really by getting your thoughts on what slow time decision-making means in the context of policing and investigations, particularly within your current role.
Yeah, so for me, the clue's in the title of slow time. And I'm sure those who are listening will be familiar with sort of time critical decisions where you're under pressure and you've got to decide really, really quickly because something is on the line. With slow time, the idea is that we've got a bit more time to reflect. It's not immediate, it might be urgent, but then urgent has different connotations, as I've found. Different organizations, different cultures, urgent means different things. So for me, when I say slow time, I mean I don't feel rushed necessarily to make a decision. I don't need to make a decision within the next few minutes. I've got a bit of time. And the decision making I'm talking about, it could take weeks to come to a decision, because that's the amount of deliberation that is involved. Or it could take a day, it could take a few hours. But the main thing for me is the time pressure is much longer than you have seconds to make a decision, and we need to make that decision now. So for the benefit of the listeners, I am a detective superintendent, and I work within the London Race Action Plan. London Race Action Plan is the Met strategic plan to improve policing for Black people, Black Londoners and Black colleagues within the police. So there is already a decision that was made with something like the London Race Action Plan, and that decision was to focus on Black people. And that raises an immediate question as to why we might do that. So we can talk a little bit around that, but the point there is that decision took a while to come to. So that is my current role. I'm what's called the operational lead. So I operationalize this strategic plan.
So let's dig into maybe your past roles up to where you are now, because you've had an absolute spectrum of roles, Henk. And I think what I'd love to do is dig into how that's changed your mindset really around decision making. So you
Mm.
used to work in the modern slavery and child exploitation units,
Yes.
and again, like you said, there's a real difference between balancing urgency and then thoughtful, strategic decision making around safety and risk. And there might be a fundamental need to move quickly and decide to take action quickly. Could I get you to speak to what that role within the modern slavery and child exploitation unit taught you about decision making?
Yeah, definitely. So to outline so I actually did two roles within that environment. So the first was as an intelligence manager. So I was in charge of a unit that manages information coming in to the police around modern slavery, around child exploitation, and my team would be responsible for assessing that intelligence and then deciding what are we going to do with it. I then moved into an investigative role, so I was a senior investigating officer, and I managed a team of investigators, and we'll take on investigations from the outset, develop them up until the point where we would arrest various individuals, working in partnership with often other law enforcement jurisdictions, so international working, um, make arrests, and then processed those investigations to court and beyond. So quite an involved process. In terms of decision making and what I've learned, I think I learned a lot about leadership and the role that leadership plays in making good decisions. And there's one principle, I can't remember who first came up with it, but this idea that the best decisions are made by the people with the information. So for me, this is where I began to understand that as someone who is more senior, I am removed from the information. I'm removed from the action. So there's a filter, and it's not that people are deliberately sort of changing or hiding things, but the fact is, if one of my team comes across something and requires some sort of decision that is at my level, they are not going to tell me all of the information. So there is a process where I decide, or I need to extract the information so that I can make a good decision. The other element of it is asking the question: do I need to make all of the decisions? So creating an environment where the least amount of decisions are coming to me as a leader. The decisions I'm making are the decisions that only I can make. So working through, and this is what I was doing in the intelligence unit because the unit was quite new. It didn't have processes, and one of my tasks was to set up processes so that we could have a good flow of intelligence. It's really important that the police, it's obvious when you think it through. We receive information all the time. We have to make assessments. We have to prioritize. Yes, we're going to act on this information. No, we're not going to act on that information. In the modern slavery unit, the kind of information that we would receive is so and so has been trafficked from this country into the UK and is now being held in a brothel. What do we do with that? Or this young person is being trafficked across the country to sell drugs and is being exploited sexually. What do we do with that information? So this is where my unit, as the intelligence unit, would triage that intelligence. So clearly we need to have good processes. Then moving on to the investigation unit, this is where we would actually take action on that information to bring about a good outcome, which ultimately is safeguarding, preserving life, protecting people from harm, which also features in decision making when we start to talk about principles, ethics, prioritize what is important. So to bring it back, the main things that I learned in that environment for me was about how can I create the best team, the best unit possible, which by minimizing the amount of decision making I'm doing, looking at the process, what decisions do I have to make? I was a detective inspector at the time. What comes to the inspector? What can my most junior person? What decision can they make? Okay, once that's clear in my mind, now how do I create the culture, the environment where I'm encouraging that to happen? The other thing around this is when we start talking about innovation. So getting better, getting your team to perform better. One of the keys for me is allowing or empowering the most junior people to make decisions, and then, you know, accepting. And there's an element of risk, and I think this is where leadership comes in. So for me, the leadership element is I am creating this environment, and people are taking risks, and with risks, things can go bad. So what happens when something goes bad? Really, really important. If something goes bad, as the leader, I need to be. What the best way to describe it is my people need to feel like I've got their back. You make an honest mistake, I've got your back. But also there's clarity around what my values are, what the parameters are here. So one of the things that I've always said to everyone that I work with is, if you're dishonest, I'm not going to defend you. If you're honest, then we can work with that, because that's one of my red lines. Dishonesty, no. If you make a mistake, just put your hand up and say, "Do you know what? I made a mistake. Genuine mistake. Great. Okay, we can work with this." And I would say that part of that, it comes from my own personal values, my own personal faith, the way that I was brought up, and I think many people will share that kind of basic idea of being open and honest. What I also, because yeah, we started with the modern slavery unit, but I had many experiences before that. So just prior to coming into the modern slavery unit, I was what is called a staff officer, which is like a private secretary or an assistant. So as a detective inspector, I was a staff officer to a commander who is, very senior, part of what we call the chief officer group. And if I'm brutally honest, I was a bit disillusioned up until that point. So I've done about 10, yeah, I had about 9, 10 years service, and I had seen behavior amongst some leaders that did not sit well with me. And the position I'd come to is thinking, in order to progress in the Metropolitan Police, I need to become a certain kind of person. And that kind of person is not who I am. It doesn't match my values. It's the template of what I was seeing overwhelmingly, or this is what I felt. This is my interpretation of what I was seeing, is very, could I use the term red personalities? Very forthright, very direct, very transactional, very bossy. I'm like, this is not me. How can I lead in this environment? It's a personality thing. That's until I became a staff officer to a commander. I'll say his name, Neil Jerome. Transformational. Neil was transformational for me, because what I saw in him. So one of the things is he was a person of faith as well. So we immediately connected. We had this very strong shared faith in common. So that was something. But then what I saw in his decision making was a very clear strand of doing the right thing. What is doing the right thing? He is someone who's full of compassion. So there are critical decisions that he is making, and at the core of that decision, how is it going to impact the people that are affected by that decision? That was the number one thing. And I thought, wow. So with all of this stuff that I've learned and been taught, there's only one other person who I can think of who had such a clear strand of compassion, kindness in their decision making. That person was a detective inspector. So I had managed to equal that person's rank. And now I'm looking up and I'm looking at a commander who I'm like, wow, this guy is driven by compassion. Then he moved on. He went to another police force on promotion after 8 months, and another commander came in. I'll say his name as well, Alex Murray. He was a person of faith. So I'm not choosing these people to work with. I chose to work with Neil. Alex, I didn't choose to work with, but he came in as a person of faith, and in a different way, was driven in the same way around compassion, different approach. And so I basically had these two examples, very different approaches, but fundamentally there's a string of compassion, there's a string of what is the right thing to do, there's a string of there's more to decision making than policy, process, legality.
As you said before,
Yeah.
Hank, it's about interpretation, but also fundamentally, as you said, the heart of it is looking for the best in people, and your red line, like you said, is dishonesty, and probably theirs as well, because I think the extension of trust belies a semblance of honesty, and that
Mm,
you're actually trying to do the best thing. Now, something you said, which I really like, just bringing it back, you said something which is really powerful, which is the people with the most with the most information, you empower to make decisions, and that's often at the front line, where
mm,
the maybe the more junior officers are interacting with the people in the brothels, or indeed
mm,
interviewing them, or
mm.
the trafficked person, but they're getting the feel, they're getting the gut feel, they're getting the semblance of the environment, they're
Yeah,
getting what the spoken word and what's not been spoken, and actually empowering them to make decisions. Like you said, actually, what that does is it releases you, but also you're probably going to get far more clarity and better decision making, because because you're not the rate limiting step in that process, and I think that's
yeah.
powerful. Actually, yeah, it's certainly a military concept which has worked in mission command, where they empower
Mm,
the frontline troops to make some of the strategic decisions. Could I
mm,
get you to speak to, because you've actually you had such a spectrum of roles, Hank, and
mm,
there's been a real, I think a lot of each one has been instructive. Could I get you to
mm.
speak to, you managed a unit, child abuse, domestic abuse,
Yeah.
and sexual offences and missing persons. Could I get you to speak to the interplay of how that made you, maybe forced you to make quicker decisions, or indeed did it? Did you still have to stand back and be quite analytical?
Yeah, so now we're getting into um yeah, there were times where some quicker decision making was required. So the thing about investigations, and I haven't really talked about investigations in detail yet. So if I can contrast some of the investigations, so modern slavery investigation, we receive information, and that investigation can take years, because of the nature of it. And at the start, the senior investigating officer will set some parameters. When this happens, this is what we're going to do. So, if we receive information that someone is being harmed now, then the decision is we go and we take action. The action that is taken is down to the next rank down, the sergeant. So, essentially, I've pre approved them to use their own judgment to say, we need to act now. Switch now to my current unit. The unit that you've described. So domestic abuse, child abuse, rape and serious sexual offences, which I managed all together. I did that for 6 months, and then I moved and then managed missing persons and some other units. So there was like a paedophile unit. Yeah. So none of this stuff is easy. But this is where my skill set is. So with the child abuse, domestic abuse, and rape and serious sexual offences, there was a combination of faster time decisions that sat with people more junior than me. But the challenge was, because what we've been talking about in terms of empowering the front line is important, but there's a caveat. they need to be competent. There needs to be a basic level of competence and experience to be able to make the right decisions. Now, what I discovered, so I moved from specialist crime, which is in the name, it's a specialist unit, people that are very experienced, to frontline policing, where the people are less experienced. And so there was a requirement for me to be more involved in some of the decision making, and intervene on occasion to say, actually, I'm not happy with that decision that's been made for A, B, and C reason. You need to go and do this. We've got a missing person. There are inquiries that haven't been done. You need to go and do those inquiries. One thing that would come to me, I was a Detective Chief Inspector, DCI at the time, victim right to review. So where the police close an investigation, a victim has the right to ask for it to be reviewed. And so I would review some of these investigations. I'd look at what the victim is saying, and they're saying, okay, this is what's happened, and this investigation has not hit these points. And I'll look at it and say, you're right. This investigation has not hit these points. So I'm going to direct that it is reopened. That's a slow time decision. The one that I described before about a missing person inquiries haven't been done, that's a fast time decision. And sometimes it's a simple case of you are present to capture and hear what is happening. So that was one of the things that I did. I was very present and visible with my teams, but not in a threatening way. So again, this is coming back to culture and building a culture of trust. I always said I want to be a senior officer that when I walk in, people say, "Oh, thank God he's here," rather than, "Oh my gosh, he's here." Thank God he's here. That's what I had that for a long time. And yeah, over time I've realised that there were different things, and this is reflecting on how I've seen other senior people conduct themselves and the impact it had on me, and then trying to replicate that. So when I first started, I was very clear about the task ahead because I knew I was there for a year. It was part of an accelerated promotion scheme. I was going there for a year, and I'd been given very clear sort of instructions by my line manager about what she wanted to achieve with the unit. So I was very clear. And so here's where a bit of longer term decision making and strategy comes in terms of establishing myself as a new person, a new manager. I'm following a manager who was very well liked, very well respected. So there's a bit of self-management here. I'm newly promoted. Maybe feeling a little bit out of my depth. Maybe feeling like, oh, I've got some big shoes to fill. But let me be myself. So I spent a month where I would try and talk to as many people as possible. Try to remember people's names, just a little bit about them. And I'm managing a unit of over 200 people, or coming up to 200 people. So I'm not going to remember everyone, but I'm gonna try as much as possible and take a genuine interest. And then speaking to a colleague of mine who I respected, and he just gave me a few tips about the right time to go and speak to people. Time and geography is really important in all of this. So understanding the flow of someone's day, and the reason why that's important, if I go at, let's say, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, right, I want to talk. No one wants to talk to me. They'll talk to me out of politeness. The reason I don't want to talk to me is they've just started. The people have been arrested overnight, so they're all kind of scrambling around trying to, sort themselves out. If I come at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the evening, which is just so most people have started to go home, and what you're left with is the late shift. The late shift started at 2 o'clock, so by the time it gets to 4, 5 o'clock, kind of figured out what it is they need to do. So they're kind of chilling out now. They're about to. It's getting close to food time, but they haven't had their food yet. So this is a good time to just go and have a chat. How's it going? and talk about random things. So someone was telling me about their boyfriend's a bodybuilder. I remembered that because it was quite it was quite interesting. So every time I saw her, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, how's your boyfriend? Oh, what competitions is he? How's he? You know?" And you try and remember these things about each person, and you're not faking it. It's a genuine interest. You just take a genuine interest in people. One principle that I had: if someone asked to speak to me, I would make every effort to speak to them, to make time. If you're in my line management structure, even if you're not, if you come to me and say, "Oh," and in the language that's used, "Oh, boss, could I, yeah, yeah, sure." Or, if I've got a meeting, I'll be like, "Do you know what? I'm in a meeting. Can I come back to you in an hour? Is it urgent? Do you need to talk to me now?" If you need to talk to me now, I will take myself out of that meeting and say, "Look, I've got something really urgent to deal with," and make my apologies. So for me, it's showing a priority. You are important. I am accessible to you, but then there's an element of respect, respect my time. And
But that's
I'm,
powerful.
yeah,
I think that's powerful. That's powerful for a number of reasons because I think what you're doing there is you're modeling to others what you want to see from them. So you're extending respect, but and hopefully getting it back in
mm,
equal measure. But you're not waiting for the extension of that respect. You're modeling it, and then hopefully that's being reflected back. And I think that's a powerful pivot in and of itself because even around decision making, I think that actually you what I realized as a critical care paramedic was really essentially be an open book as far as share the mental model, share what's on your mind, don't keep people guessing around you, and
mm,
actually, be easily accessible to your point. Um, Use language which is accessible, but also just inquisitive. So just inquire as to what people are thinking at all junctures. Share what
yep,
you're thinking freely, and quickly, so
yep,
that actually everything is overt, nothing's covert, everything's explicit, nothing's implicit. People aren't walking on eggshells,
yeah,
and there's just this. There's a general knowledge in the room because actually people feel comfortable. You're putting people at rest, both patients, but also and families, but also the team. And actually,
yeah,
what you're speaking of there, I think, which is powerful, is, being, I guess, in a way, the first mover in the room to be extend trust, extend respect, be overt in your approach, and then actually, you at the right time, and then
yeah,
you'll get that back. Which is
yeah. And it's funny you say that because there were a couple of incidents and I think wisdom is so important sometimes because you can have a policy, everyone knows what the policy is, and things happen and things can be brushed under the carpet because there is a concern because the policy says this. If this gets said, this is what the policy says. So anyway, there was a new person who came in, a new junior manager who came in to the unit, and that person didn't get on with everyone, and they'd come from a particular unit where I think the culture was different. So from the outset, I could see that this person had a bit of a bumpy, like the whole situation. I could see it was a bit bumpy for them. There then emerged a situation where there were a number of complaints about something that this person had done. And I was in a situation where I was kind of hearing these complaints and I needed to at least find out enough so that I could speak directly to the person concerned to say, look, here, this is the issue. So this is where the currency of what we've been describing really came into play. Because I had one of my supervisors, so being a detective, I'd done some cursory investigation. I knew who the critical people were. And I made an approach to the supervisor to say, I'm hearing that something has taken place. Can you tell me what's gone on? And they're like, oh, don't want to do that because we're gonna do someone's legs here. That's what they were feeling. So I was like, okay. They've gone away. They've spoken to another person who is more senior, but was known to them. And essentially, what I heard was, this person absolutely swears by you that you will do the right thing. So they came back, and this is what they said. Oh, we spoke to so and so. They absolutely swear by you. So okay, cool. What have you got to tell me? So in a kind of roundabout way, established the facts, went away, spoke to said individual, but delivered it in a way that, I mean, it was a shock to that individual. And for me, this is where compassion comes in, because when someone does something, we've really got to think about why these things are happening. And one of the things that was in the back of my mind is something like neurodiversity at play here? So it was a very wide conversation where I was saying, look, what has happened here can't continue, but also I'm thinking some things because of what's happening here. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We finished the conversation. That person is contrite and repentant and is apologizing, but also says thank you, and also says to me, you're one of the first managers. I feel like you actually care. That person has then gone to the people that are aggrieved and apologized to them. So then I'm walking through the office, and the first guy, who's the one that came back to say, so and so swears by you, took me aside. He's like, oh, boss, this is what's happened. This is the best possible outcome. Like he couldn't believe that it turned out like that. And I just chuckled and I said, well, do you agree now with that other person? So for me, there was a lot of currency that had been built up. Now it doesn't always work, and I'm pleased it turned out like that. And I'm not saying that, you can do all the right things and things can go really bad in these workplace environments. But yeah, the key thing for me there was, I know what the policy is, but let me try and see past what is happening here. And also, there's a principle, procedural justice. Procedural justice is really, really important, particularly for those of us who wield power and how we interact with those who we have some form of power over. So in the policing context, procedural justice is very important, because I could stop you in your vehicle and I could behave in a way that is legally right but feels unfair. And I could say, oh, well, you've done this, you've done that, and you've got a bald tire. You say, oh, but I didn't know. What procedural justice says is that it's important that you, even if you have offended, even if you are an offender, you need to feel like you've been treated fairly. You also need to have a voice in the proceedings. So with this in mind, and this is a principle, whenever I'm talking to someone and I say, this is my decision, and someone reflects something back to me, if I can change my decision, I will, to demonstrate that they have influence on me. So as we're talking, I'm saying, right, this is what's happened, so this is what I'm going to do, this is the sanction. And that person made some representations about doing something different. And I had a think and I said, yeah, all right, you know what? I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you to, change what you're doing, and I'm now going to change what I'm going to do. Built up a lot of trust with that individual. Now that person feels like they have to, and this is part of motivation. How do we get people to perform? How do we get people to work for us?
Yeah.
And these are part of the things.
So, Hank, just to flip that on its head a little bit, actually, because I think just that example was a powerful one about slow time decision making, but also getting all the information, applying compassion to the protocol, to the procedure, and actually coming out with a fantastic result. Could I get you to speak to So something you said there, which is actually really quite powerful, it's actually the application of trust to someone who, like you say, might not be compliant in so much way, either a colleague or indeed or a member of the public. Um, could I get you to speak to when there is clearly malevolence there? There's a malevolent actor, and
Yep,
there's deviousness, and albeit you kind of you're approaching them because you absolutely have worked in, like say, to break pedophile rings
yep,
to child exploitation,
yep,
prostitution, every
yep.
and what's the lens there for a different type of decision making? How do you yeah, is it just pragmatic? Do you act on gut feel, or how does the valence of that change?
That's a really good question. So I think the conduct itself. So you look at the conduct. What is the severity of the conduct? If the conduct is of a certain severity, there is no debate. Certain things are happening. And when we look at intelligence, intelligence comes in that so and so is part of, let's say, intelligence comes in so and so is part of a paedophile ring. Then a certain threshold is met for police activity, where we will now commence an investigation to confirm, prove or disprove so and so's involvement in said activities. And there's ways that we'll do that. Threshold has been met. So for me there's a pre-decision around the severity. What is the severity? And some of it is gut feeling, but a lot of it is codified. Okay, so if we're in a grey area, for me it's about a conversation. And this is why people get arrested and are interviewed. This is what's happened. Can you tell us what has happened? Why did you do this? What was the motivation here? The same principle applies. Where okay, let's say it's a colleague that's done something. Same principle applies. What was the thinking here? What was the motivation? Having gathered some information, I'm thinking about a particular situation where, in fact, more than once, on more than one occasion, I've had colleagues who have been disrespectful to other colleagues. That is another red line for me. Respect, non-negotiable, absolutely non-negotiable. And if you are more senior than someone, you have a form of social power over someone, there is, for me, a requirement to be more respectful to someone who is more junior than you. And also recognizing certain cultures at play where so within the police service there is a divide between those who take a detective route and those who remain on the uniform pathway. And this goes back years, where as a young PC, you have made an arrest and you go into the CID office and you've got your detective sergeant there, who is usually someone of some years' experience, and you now have to present this case to this detective sergeant, who is now going to scrutinise it. And in the Metropolitan Police that I grew up in, that detective sergeant can be very rude to that PC. I've experienced it. I know other people have. So when I became a DCI, that was one of the things I was like, this will not happen in my unit. And I've made it clear to everyone that this will not happen in my unit. So if a DS is rude to a PC, then I'm going to...
That's a red line. Yeah.
That's a red line. I'm going to have some words. And depending on what has happened, determines the way that I may respond. So the position is, I know who all of my DSs are, my detective sergeants, because I've spoken to all of them. I've spent time with them. I've invested in them. So when I now turn around and say, I'm not happy with what you've done here because you've been disrespectful to this person, that's going to hit different.
Yeah,
So that
absolutely. Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I think to be honest, because you foster relationship with them more, there's a semblance of not breaking that relationship, but that there's an emotional bond there in a good way, in a trustworthy way. So when that's broken, but I think what you're also saying, which is really informative to me, Henk, is that you've got these psychological and or protocolized red lines from a public perspective, but from a staff perspective, there's these psychological red lines of like lack of respect and others, which and actually once that's crossed, that makes the decision easier to act
Yeah.
in and have that conversation and then proceed down that line, which in a way is very informative because it helps you make and come to a decision, and it's almost like I don't know, a cognitive enabler or a
Mm.
forcing function that actually now this has been crossed, now this A's happened, now B is going to ensue.
You asked about where there is potentially malevolence.
Mm.
So there has been occasions where that interaction has not had the desired outcome. And for me, the principle is what is fair, and trying to be as fair as I physically can possibly be. As a police officer, I think in terms of if I had to go to court and justify what I've done, am I happy that I can say to a judge, this is why I did what I did? If I'm happy to do that, then I'm going to do it. That's my own personal, and it's also partly because the reality is that I could end up in court. That is the reality. As a senior manager, I could end up, because I've made the decision and someone perceives it in a particular way. So I say that to say that um, that I have taken decisions where, yeah, there has been quite a significant action taken because having gone through this process, at the end of it, I'm not satisfied that there has been an appropriate consideration for the impact. I'm not satisfied that the person is moving in the right direction. So I've had to take the appropriate action. So the point here is that action will be taken, and it's important that everyone knows that action will be taken, because otherwise there's no power behind saying this is what we do here.
No,
So,
Hank,
so
totally. I
basically,
totally,
yeah,
I totally resonates with me. And actually, there is, like compassion first, but there has to be action on the back of that and ramification if those, like you say, lines are crossed, and that's equally powerful because other people are observing that. And actually, Hank's not a pushover. Ahenkora is actually, he leads with compassion, but actually, you cross him and cross him again. You better be ready because there's going to be the full weight of not only the law, but also just relationship. If fundamentally from a colleague perspective. So, but absolutely, and I think there's that push pull nature, and it's really interesting to see where that lies with you. Actually, I
mm,
think. Could I get you to speak to this? So there's a couple of things really. One
mm,
is the role of intelligence and data gathering and how you, Henk, as a professional and also as
yeah,
a person, engage with data to
yeah,
make decisions.
yeah. That's a really another great question, and I wouldn't say data is king, but it's close for me, because I think data doesn't tell the full story. So we have the national decision making model, and I'm doing this because it's in a circle. You may have seen it, and it starts with informational intelligence coming in, and I actually like the word information, because intelligence, I recognise, is not a phrase that everyone is familiar with. And by intelligence, what we mean in the police is information that may or may not be true. So it's not like evidence. Evidence is okay, there is a concrete fact that points to something has happened. evidence. Intelligence may or may not be true. You tell me, so and so down the street has a gun, and so there's going to be a process of assessing that information. How do you? So these are the sort of questions. How do you know? When did you last know? Who else knows? These are the sorts of questions. It may be that actually you have been previously involved in organised crime. That is an ex-associate, and actually you've had a bit of a falling out. So that could make your intelligence credible, but also you have a reason to set the police on said person. So we'll try and corroborate said intelligence. What other ways can we check if that information is true? So that is intelligence, and that's important in the operational context. Because, for example, someone from MO19, our firearms department, will receive information and will act on that information. And often it can be a very small piece of information, but the threshold for action has been reached on that information. And they will go through that national decision-making model, because the next bit is risk, the risk of acting, the risk of not acting. Now I'm testing. Then we go to our powers and policies and our legal powers. Then we go to our tactical options, and we make a decision what we're going to do. And then we go to observe and review what's happened. And that review should give us more information for us to then go around that again. So the start and the end is actually information. The information, the initial information, we go through our process, and then we have a look at what's happened, and we end up with more information or changed information. When we're talking about data, which is a specific type of information, I love data, and I have a strong affinity for data because of my academic background. So I studied mathematics in university. I then did a master's degree in applied criminology. And so, yeah, the notion of data for me is increasingly important in the policing context. But then what we also now have is disinformation and misinformation. So it's very important to be able to apply a critical eye on information, on data. The other thing about data is data can lie. By lie, I mean it can present a picture that looks one way and obscures certain truths. So in the London Race Action Plan, where I currently work, we talk about racial disparities. One of the overwhelming challenges with our data, and it's not just us, and this for me speaks to how we can have structural inequality, is where in our data we group together people of different backgrounds who are vastly different, but they are homogenized when it comes to data. And you've got lots of different experiences that are represented by one data set. And that does lead us to make decisions that are biased without us even realizing it. So when we talk about systematic discrimination, inequality, systemic racism, which impacts all of our services, in fact, every element of society is impacted by this. This is, for me, a small example of where it plays out. For me, it's important for leaders in particular to ask certain questions. What is behind the data? What does this really mean? One of the key things, if I could say to everyone, simple question for me, which I ask every time I see it, when I see data and it says white and everyone else, whatever term we used to use BAME, that's gone. Ethnic minorities, whatever the term is, grouped together. Simple question: what is the breakdown of that data? That simple question will help us immeasurably, because there are certain things that affect certain populations. So thinking in the medical context, sickle cell anemia is a significant issue for Black people and Asian people, South Asian people in particular, but particularly Black African and Caribbean people, particularly Black African, and it can be devastating, and it's an area where there should be more insight into, but the insight isn't where it should be. So that's just one example of, for me, asking the right questions when we're looking at data.
So something you said earlier, Hank, which I think I'd like to really zoom in on actually is how you were brought up actually, and if you could get you to speak to your heritage around just the influence really that your background and that your parents had on you, influence how it's influenced your leadership style, your processing of information and decision making, how they made decisions, and if I could just get you to give us an insight into that, just to really sort of piece together how you see the world.
Yeah. So it's an interesting question because, firstly, I think my parents have done a fantastic job. Because growing up in London is not easy, and when I reflect on my experiences and the experiences of, so I have two brothers, one older, one younger. My older brother's also in the police. My younger brother's a personal trainer and an actor, so he took a very different route, but we're all very close. And yeah, our parents did a fantastic job because certainly working within the police and seeing the trajectory of so many young Black men in particular, it is a hostile environment, I would say, to be a Black man in London for a whole host of reasons. And what my parents managed to instill in us is a sense of purpose, a strong sense of right and wrong, and it was mainly through church. So I grew up in the church. Then, later in life made my own decisions about faith. But the church environment provided a set of role models, which I think were really important. And I think when we look at young men today, it's really interesting that there is a lot of commentary around young men, the trajectory that young men, in particular, and something that I hear regularly is this idea of role models. This idea of role models being important, and I would say that my parents instilled that in me, providing a raft of role models. I think my parents taught me up. I think my dad in particular talked me up. And what I mean by that is instilled this idea that I can achieve something if I work hard. So he had his way of doing that. They're pretty strict, which is kind of normal, I think, standard, particularly for African parents. And there's a strong sense of respect. But then, I'm painting it in a really positive light because it was positive, but there were some challenges. So there's a big challenge of identity, which I've now managed to kind of unpick with my parents. And by identity, I mean me figuring out where I belong. Being born in London, parents from Ghana, my connection with Ghana for the majority of my life hasn't been particularly strong. But then feeling like I don't quite belong here. In primary school, I'm like, my name's different to everyone's. A simple thing like that tells you that somehow you're different. But yeah, I think this is really important in terms of identity and the uniqueness of the United Kingdom and London. That we have so many people who identify with this place, but also identify with somewhere else, and that's okay. I think that's a beautiful thing. So yeah, so there was that tension growing up, but overwhelmingly, yeah, it's just real positive values, which I say hard work ethic as well, because at times my dad was working two jobs, and I saw that. So hard work ethic, and just having a basic position of respect, giving respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
That's powerful. And I think ultimately, I think the interesting interplay here is, and you see it working in the police 18 years. I certainly saw it within London, working as a paramedic, was actually because treating kids, either the stabbings or indeed gang crime or otherwise, but actually your parents do and significant others do have a profound effect on you. But I think what society recognizes now, but has only really chosen to focus on as a new word concept, is the role that your community and indeed your peer group has on you as well. And I think parents have a fundamental role, but when you start to become a teenager, I think your peer group exerts more pressure, not necessarily pressure, but influence
mm,
on you, and I think that can be a game of Russian roulette in a way, because I think if you get in with the wrong crowd, that can be a real force for worse, or detractor almost in achieving your potential. And it's
mm,
but so as you say, that being in a church group or being around mentors and or people that actually are a force for good, and that isn't your parents, but it's people around you, and your brothers also encouraging you in that way, actually hopefully has done you well as well. Because I think something that is only really coming to light is the power of peer groups, and you'll see,
mm,
I think, within London, and actually 100 times more, the power of the social cohesion and or approval that especially young men, seek
mm.
from their peers. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, as you say, it's an area where there's increasing interest. So in my criminology studies of the trajectory of individuals who become involved in crime, there are factors that we either term desistance that causes people to move away from at least wanting to participate. And so there's an age range from about 14, 15 that starts to kind of reduce at sort of early 20. So when you get to about 25, this is where you see a natural desistance. My understanding, and you'll know, and the other medical professionals will know about the brain development, and my basic understanding is that kind of matches the development of the male brain in terms of maturity. But then there's certain things that can happen that can accelerate that process. Peer group, you're right, is one of them. It can lead to uh, increased involvement through social networks, or it can lead the other way. What's also interesting is relationships. Having a child is one of the key things that, according to research that I've seen, causes people to want to move out of crime. And we're talking about people who that they haven't just dabbled in it. It's like a life course that their life has taken this trajectory. Anecdotally, and it's a kind of tacit knowledge that many police officers have, and it's always been a tragic thing where you see someone's life course. If you work in an area long enough, you get to know certain people because they regularly have contact with the police. And it's almost like a simple thing, like when they get arrested, they have their photo taken. And I remember the first time I came across someone who was maybe 25, 26, I've arrested them for some offence, and I've gone into the system and I see all these pictures. And it's like that's when they were 10, and now 15 years later, and then it gets to the point where you are forecasting someone's future on the basis of your interaction with them. And we will talk about this as officers. And that's why I say tacit knowledge. We didn't go to university to study criminology to gain this knowledge. It's observed. We see it happening. So I think the role of the peer group is really important. If I link it back to my parents, I think one of the key decisions that they made was about what church to go to. They decided based on the young people that were in a particular church. We're going to move from this church to that church because there's young people in that church. And we think that our sons are going to make good friends there. That was an active decision they made, and I think it bore fruit, for want of a better term. It generated the outcome that they were looking for.
I think, like I said, there's that intentionality there, which is fantastic to see actually. And it is intentional decision making, I think, in multiple ways. And so just bringing the conversation to land a couple more questions, really, Hank, because I'm mindful we've been going for just about an hour now. Would be around feedback into your decision making, and how in a way how that occurs in your service and how that occurs within yourself, actually, Hank, because you are a mindful professional and you are reflective. I've known you for a long time now, and you are reflective in your way. Could you just speak to maybe how you reflect on decision making and get feedback, and maybe if there is this, also a service level way of giving staff feedback?
Yeah, so if I could start with the service level, because I think that's easier, because that's defined. There are areas that are well developed. So we have things like debriefs. Incident happens, we have a debrief, where we essentially dissect the incident. And in certain environments, the debrief is so ingrained into the culture, and it's in the authorized professional practice that it always happens. But where it falls down is where you're not in that environment. So let's say what I describe as frontline policing. Unless you have an individual who's in that environment that is really, for want of a better term, into that debrief culture. Because yeah, thinking back as to my experiences, there's only certain times I've had this kind of debrief, but it is an important thing. Now, one thing that we have improved on is the mental health provisions. So this is now a different kind of debrief, and I remember having counselling and also having a team debrief with it was like a peer support person, and both were designed to be more therapeutic, so that I don't get PTSD, because I dealt with what turned out to be a child murder. So it was pretty horrific. Yeah, and so these are different forms of debrief, and what was good about that is that that was activated by the people I was working with, who were consciously mindful of the impact in terms of mental health. So then, in terms of myself, you're right. I am a very reflective person, which is not always a good thing. But what I have learnt to do is, with trusted people, to be open and honest, but with trusted people to be particularly honest. So build enough relationship with key individuals where you can ask for feedback. Line manager. I have always asked my line manager for feedback. I think it's absolutely critical. Like everyone, I haven't always gotten on with my line managers, but getting that feedback provide something to act on, and being able to ask good questions, then I've amended how I do certain things based on the way that people have interacted with me. Where I've line managed people and they've asked me questions, and I'll be like, "That's a good question. I'm going to ask that question." So this idea of constantly learning of everybody, anyone can teach, can learn something off anyone. So I think that's another important element. And then we have formal tools like 360, but I think the informal feedback that we receive is really important as well. And I've been fortunate as time has gone on that I've received more and more of that. So I gave the example of the colleague who was like, "So and so swears by you." That was feedback. That was feedback because the person that he was referring to was a highly respected person. I was thinking, okay, something is going well here. Then where things are not going well, taking that as feedback, and how can things be improved? So if I end by saying I think self-awareness is really important, particularly as someone who's senior, recognizing that when someone says something, there has to kind of be an assessment of, okay, what is the impact of my seniority on this person? It might not have any impact whatsoever, or it might have quite a significant impact that I'm only getting a third of the story. So how can I try and get more of the story?
But that's in a way, Hank, that's really powerful because actually what you're getting there is there is feedback all around us, and you're right, it's being intentional to access that, either by just being explicit and saying, "Look, can you give me some feedback on how you perceive me to be?" And also, I've learned there's a powerful question and it's so simple. It's am I missing anything? And
Mm,
so when we used to would run a cardiac arrest or indeed a trauma call or anything really that's acute, you'd share the mental model in the moment, and the perfect feedback question was, am I missing anything from what I've just explicitly said to the room, to everyone in the room, about the airway, breathing, circulation, the treatment plan, the hospital or not? Are we going to uh, declare life extinct on this person, or how is that going to play out? But that's that am I missing anything is a feedback mechanism, which actually, because one thing I realized is that actually you are fallible. As even as you grow in your seniority, there's a fallible hindsight bias, confirmation bias.
mm,
There is also a certain degree of sunk cost bias where you can commit to one plan and it might not necessarily be the right plan. There's a certain element of just a complete sort of blindness to potentially significant pieces of information, that
mm,
cognitive dissonance as well. And I see there's a real semblance, and I'm certainly guilty of being cognitively dissonant. So being almost sticking with something, refusing to hear otherwise because I'm latched onto a certain diagnosis. And actually,
mm,
that doesn't serve me well. Doesn't serve anyone well. It certainly doesn't serve the patient well. And I think it's learning to step down from that in the moment, and being prepared to, like you said earlier, change your mind.
mm,
Have that motivation to actually explore other options. Make active listening your first your first approach, and move from there. Hank, just as we
mm,
finish in the
mm,
conversation, the last question I really wanted to get from you to speak to really is other aspiring leaders really
mhm,
that want to move and operate, not necessarily in policing or paramedicine, just in life, just and but they want to cultivate things you've spoken about around, good slow time decision making through
mhm.
maybe discipline and patience. But could I get you to speak to some lessons learned and maybe just some fundamental takeaways for facilitating good slow time decisions?
Yeah. So number one, take risks. Do not be afraid to take a risk. It is absolutely important, but it is a calculated risk. There's a phrase that has always stuck in my mind. The thinking is often worse than the doing. And so what I'm talking about effectively is self-management. I think self-management is the most important thing so that we can make good decisions or great decisions. We have to acknowledge that we are afraid. And what are we afraid of? Afraid of looking silly, afraid of failure. We need to address these things. So the thinking is often worse than the doing. Another principle that I can't attribute it, but I heard it a long time ago, is one of the ways to make good decisions is not to think about what's going to happen to me if it goes wrong, but to think about what needs to be done. So I can have that moment where I panic, and then there's some self-soothing. So for me, saying a prayer, someone else, it might be breathing. There's physical things that people can do to kind of break that circuit of panic. So you recognize, I feel overwhelmed. Break that circuit, bring yourself back. Now focus on what needs to be done, not on what's going to happen to you if it goes wrong. So for me, these are very practical things, just to acknowledge that our decision making is impacted by fear. The other thing that I'd say is, which is linked to this, is look after yourself. I've learned to look after myself. So we talked just before we came on about me doing nights, and what I've learned to do. So I've changed the way that I eat and changed sort of my exercise regime and all of these things as part of focusing on well-being. A bit of meditation. So these are all great things to think about. Basics: what we eat, how much sleep we're getting, how much exercise we're getting, how much sunlight we're getting, how much social contact, how much fun are we having, how much family time are we having. Like, all of these things are really, really important. And recognizing when these things, for those of us who are people of faith, the spirituality element, really, really important. Whatever that looks like. The point here is that we try and keep all of these things in balance. For me, what that means is when the crisis happens, I have a certain level of resilience to deal with that crisis. So in terms of nights, I made a conscious decision about how I'm going to exercise on my nights, how I'm going to eat on my nights. Because in the past, I've kind of slobbed around all day, sort of rolled in. Oh, it's reaching 1 o'clock. Haven't really planned what I'm doing. Oh, yeah, it's going to be some takeaway. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And yeah, I just felt like so I started with, feeling these negative feelings, and then sort of managing them. I feel like when we are in a good place in terms of our well-being, we are able to make better decisions. And a simple thing, I remember when I was duty superintendent for the first time. So this is a day shift, and I'll be honest with you, I was terrified. I mean, I didn't need to be, but let's be honest, doing something new, thinking, shoot, I'm the guy who's in charge of whatever, Westminster. This is a big deal. Terrified. So what did I do? I went for a run in the morning. And when I was on my way into work, I just felt the endorphins start to kick in. I was like, I feel like I can handle this. So for me, starting with ourselves and just doing these basic things is not selfish, to look after ourselves. And it's one of these basic things that we're taught in triage. There's a major incident. Don't put yourself in danger because you can't help anyone. If you're taken out, you can't help anyone. So for me, that is the number one thing I would say. And then I think the next thing is values. What are our values? So for me, in the position I'm in, I've talked about respect. I've talked about honesty. Like, these are basics. The big thing for me in my decision making is compassion. How are these things going to impact the people that I'm making? How is this going to impact people? who are affected by this decision we're making. And this idea of doing the right thing. So sometimes there's no right or wrong answer. So it might sound strange if I say, well, what is do the right thing? So this is what our values, according to my values, this is the right thing to do. Within the legal framework, I can do that or I can do that. This is the right thing. This to me feels more fair. This to me feels more compassionate. So that's why I'm going to do that thing. And then the last thing is get your advisors. Get your advisors. Know who your phone a friend is, because a phone a friend is so important. So who are those trusted people who are going to be there for you, and they're actually going to be there for you? And I was in a fortunate position when I went on nights, because I had about 5 different people say, "Oh, if you need to, you can call me in the middle of the night." So I took that as some social capital that I've amassed. I didn't need to call anyone because I knew what I was doing, but it helped soothe me in the moment. Oh yeah, I could call. Oh yeah, if I need to. So it's just that's the 3 things I would say. So one is look after ourselves. Like, let's be honest about being afraid. It's okay. It happens to all of us. And let's look after ourselves in terms of well-being. Then, in terms of our values, I've talked about what is paramount for me, which is compassion, respect, and honesty. For all of us, let's think about what these things are. And if they're the same things, great, because they probably will be very, very similar. And then, finally, we need to lean on others. We need to lean on others. That's what I would say.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think those 3 take-homes are powerful, mate. They really are. Listen, thank you for the past hour. It's been great just to get not only your thoughts and reflections, Hank, but also your experience and just really, your lived experience over almost 20 years. And that's just, that's irreplaceable, really. So listen, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
And thank you for having me on this. It's been great. Always a great conversation.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.